alaikum and welcome to our Forerunner50 series, where we interview pioneers in their respective fields that have achieved success, not despite, but through living their values. Today we're so excited to be joined by Dr. Rania Awaad. Dr. Rania is a clinical professor of psychiatry at the Stanford University School of Medicine, where she is the director of the Stanford Muslim Mental Health and Islamic Psychology Lab, as well as Stanford University's affiliate chaplain. She's renowned for her pioneering work in addressing the mental health needs of Muslim Americans. She teaches a course on Islamic psychology, and as part of her instruction, integrates culture and religion into medical care. And prior to studying medicine, she pursued classical Islamic studies in Damascus, Syria, and she holds certifications in Quran, Islamic law, and other branches of the Islamic sciences. Dr. Rania, thank you so much for joining us here. We're at the ICNA convention. So, alhamdulillah, we were able to find hopefully a relatively quiet corner. You may hear some noises around, but we really appreciate you taking the time and taking a few minutes to be with us to engage in this conversation.
Mashallah, it's my pleasure and my honor to be put with Forerunners.
Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah. Dr. Awaad, I'd like to start with this, just even in that introduction. SubhanAllah, you have obviously the background in the classic Islamic sciences, but then you also have your training in medicine. I'd love to hear just maybe, was that always the plan, to pursue both of those? Was that something that was, an inspiration or realization that you had along the way in either of those areas to study both of those disciplines and eventually bring them together?
Definitely the latter, mashallah. I really couldn't have foreseen what I'm doing right now. To be very honest, people who know my story know that even psychiatry, I had no intention actually to enter the field. I myself held a lot of internalized stigma towards the field. Definitely did not see myself doing this. I knew I wanted to become a physician, and my studies in Syria at the time before the war and studying Sharia was really a personal journey. It was really something I wanted to do for myself. I didn't necessarily intend it to or foresee it coming to be to where I was going to be a teacher or somebody who was going to be in a place of the honor really of being a khadima or a servant of the deen. And then in that work, it was actually doing Islamic work in the community, that it became clear to me that we actually have a lot of mental health challenges and needs. And at this point I was in medical school and made a very last minute transition into psychiatry in hopes to actually bridge these worlds that never really speak to each other very often. And so here we are today, subhanAllah, with Islamic psychology.
SubhanAllah. Yeah. And one of the things we're asking folks is kind of what's the sense of purpose, or what's the purpose underneath that kind of drives, all these decisions? Usually when we look at kind of the different paths that we all take, sometimes we realize it as we're going through it, sometimes it's in retrospect. What would you say has been kind of the integrating kind of, purpose statement for you that brings some of these things together?
Yeah, subhanAllah. This is a story where I really feel we plan, and Allah plans, and Allah's the best of planners. And now retrospectively looking back, it makes a whole lot of sense. In fact, the very statement that I think captures that was actually my husband, who in that very important moment where he sort of at the very end of medical school as I was applying for residency, he's the one who actually turned to me and he said, there's a lot of people who, I was planning on becoming an obstetrician. And I thought, okay, I'll do this for Muslim women. Muslim women need women doctors, especially, OB. And he said to me, there's a lot of good people who can deliver babies safely, but there's not a lot of people who are trained in the deen who can actually speak to the mental health of our community. And at that point I just looked at him and I said, what are you talking about here? What is the story? And it was literally a completely different shift. And in retrospect, subhanAllah, all the research and work, because all of that too was a very personal, it was me trying to understand my place in mental health. Where do Muslims fit into this story where we seem like we did not fit in at all or exist? And looking at the research in the background, realizing, subhanAllah, not only is there incredible rich history of Islam and mental health, but it was uncovered. It was not known or had been lost in time, if you will, buried in the dust of time. And now looking back retrospectively makes a whole lot of sense why the deen studies and the psychiatry studies actually made sense to bring together. But I couldn't have seen that at that point.
SubhanAllah. And I'd love, because I've heard you speak about it, I'd love for you to give a little bit about how those two areas of study, and even what it required from you in terms of studying Islamic sciences and studying psychiatry, How do those two disciplines kind of intertwine together? What are some examples of where they intersect and how your study of one informed the study of other or vice versa, or helped you appreciate it more?
Yeah, definitely. I'll share this much. When I entered into the field, because I was, again, very last minute decision, I was very worried. I would actually say more than worried. I was actually say I was very suspicious of the field of psychiatry. And a lot of that uncovering and kind of researching and working was really me trying to figure out, do I even fit here? Because I was hearing from family and friends and community things like, you wasted your medical education on this, right? Nobody's going to come. No, we don't go to psychiatrists. Nobody's going to come to you. I was hearing statements like this, and really felt like, where is this connection? But actually, the concept of healing, especially in Islam, this very holistic understanding of healing, mind, body, soul, is the message of Islam. And the first thing I ran into were sort of the scholars, right? Individual scholars, and I've shared previously some of the scholars and the research I was doing, where I was just astounded by the fact that their writings included what seemed like modern day psychiatric writings and diagnosis and classifications, and it was written centuries and centuries ago. And that was part of that insight of Islam, giving them the sense of mind, body, soul. We have to look at everything in unison. Then a little later, and what I'm currently working on, is beyond the individuals, because somebody could say, well, he was a genius. Right. But what about the rest of the society, the Islamic heritage? Actually, beyond the people like the Balkhis and the Razis and the Ibn Sinas, what they had were institutions of healing. And that's what I'm working on right now, this concept of the Madistan, or the Holistic Healing Center. And in modern psychiatry, this is actually the push they're trying to go to as well. This understanding that the modern mental health system is actually broken, fragmented. People go and they receive pills or some talk therapy, but it's not really holistic healing. But Islam has this. And I think as Muslims, there's a lot we can offer to really any field, but here's the mental health field, as we're talking about, to really bring back something that's very holistic, that's been missing for a long time. The reception of this concept has been amazing, actually. Muslims, non-Muslims alike, they're really excited about the idea of, yes, let's actually heal a person altogether holistically. This is our Islam.
SubhanAllah. And what I hear in that at a personal level also is, sometimes when we talk, we call this forerunners from the term of sabiqun,
yes.
And being pioneers and trailblazers. And again, it's easy to look back on stories such as yourself and say, SubhanAllah, you're uncovering these connections. And yet, going through it, I sense there was, maybe trepidation, or, is there going to be something that's out there? And so there is a leap of faith,
yes.
That you have to take towards understanding that, yes, I know that our deen of Islam is complete and has, all of these different concepts. And yet I myself may not see that connection yet, but I'm still willing to go through this journey to see how I can align, my work towards that, and also bring the rest of the society along with me as part of that. Is that a fair characterization in terms of just the personal feeling and kind of that, maybe that feeling of unease initially, but then what are those moments along the journey that give you kind of the confidence to keep going?
Absolutely. And I would say it's even more than just my own personal feelings of unease. There were definitely moments where I was literally told, this isn't what psychiatry is about. There isn't room for this. In probably my first or second year of training at Stanford, there was a grant that was an internal grant to the department, and I applied to it. And mind you, this application is this study was about Muslim women and their mental health. That was kind of the topic. Yeah. And I had actually previously applied to an NIH grant when I was in medical school with the same topic and had it funded. So it's not like it was bad science.
Right.
But the application came back in all red ink, just marked off completely. And it's taken me a while to actually open up and talk about this, because it's very one of those very vulnerable moments. Yeah. And in this kind of scribble red ink, the person who had looked at this application and read it said, there is no space for this in psychiatry. This
was written on the paper, subhanAllah.
And this is a disgrace to our field, and there is no place in our department for this. And I remember receiving this. Actually, in fact, it was so egregious that my program director wouldn't just put it in my mailbox. Actually called me into the office to say, I didn't write this.
They had to clarify.
And there are people in this department who feel this way, and you're up against a lot of challenges trying to bring in this discussion of faith into a field, especially psychiatry and psychology, that's been very secular and very even antagonistic to faith and religion. So it's been an uphill battle, absolutely.
What are the things that get you, through that, even day to day, or what are some of the milestones where you saw, we call it, one of the questions we ask is kind of what's the Fateh Makkah types of moments,
Yes.
Where after the struggle, you see a small opening, and also part of what we call Fateh Makkah is Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam recognizing that it wasn't only through his work, but it was through the tawfiq of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the humility. But what are some of those milestones along the way that gave you strength to say, you know what, this is something that is worth fighting for, and making sure that we're able to demonstrate that this heritage, this intellectual heritage that we have, needs to be talked about, needs to be shared?
Yes, definitely. SubhanAllah, I think one of the first ones was actually finding Balkhi's work through who then became my mentor, rahimahullah, Professor Malik Badri, may Allah have mercy on his soul. And writing to him, honestly, it was a cold call. I just sort of sent this email and said, I'm Rania, I'm at Stanford, and I found this thing. And I think I'm finding what I see is, and I was currently working on at that time, OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder. And he wrote back. I mean, there's no reason for someone like Professor Malik to write back to me. And he said, absolutely, this is excellent, And there was also a professor at Stanford, one of our professors, who had taught us about OCD. And it was one of those very interesting moments, because when I tried to say this to him, I think I found something from the 9th century, and you're telling us that the first person who discovered OCD is in the 19th century, a millennium of a difference. And at first he was sort of like, no. And then when he asked me to translate the section, and I did. And when I showed it to him, he was the one jumping for joy, jumping for joy. And that was one of those moments where you felt a little bit of fatah, like an opening. And he was the one who actually said, you must publish this. I wasn't thinking academic publications. This is a personal journey. But we did publish it. And here's a real moment, subhanAllah, when the reviewers come back.
Yes.
Because these are double-blinded, peer-reviewed, in academic medical journals. And the reviewer had written on there, he said, who knows, I don't know if it's a he or she, right? It's blinded. Right. And it's really funny, considering that they thought I was a he, because they wrote he said. So I did the same thing. MashaAllah. Anyhow, this bias of medicine.
SubhanAllah.
And actually wrote and said, this paper proves and overturns the history of psychology as we know it, and then quoted a person named Barrios, which is a historian that has been very antagonistic to Islam. In Barrios' work actually says Muslims, all they did was translate the works of the Greek, and they contributed nothing of their own accord. And when I saw this person who I don't even know, this reviewer, right, it's a historian of medicine writing this and saying it's overturning Barrios, there was definitely one of those moments of like, oh, subhanAllah, like a full circle moment, because there's no reason he would have quoted that same person. And that's where you see Allah is sending messages of like, keep going, this is important. Yes. And many other milestones along the way from there, founding the lab. Yes. As a place that I didn't have myself. Yes. I had to go across the country to Duke, actually, to a place that was much more amenable to the discussion of religion and medicine, religion and psychiatry, and said to myself, if they give me the ability to join the faculty here at Stanford, the first thing I'm going to do is set up a lab that mentors people like myself.
Why did you feel that was so important? I mean, why did you feel it was so important to make sure that it wasn't just about a personal journey, but you were able to build something that was going to be able to persist and help, the next person and generation?
Yeah. A lot of it had to do with, in academic medicine, or the academia in general, the academy in general, you can't go forward unless you actually have a certain level of mentorship. You need people who are going to be vouching for you. Eventually, people are going to write letters for you, who are going to help you in your promotion process. And if you don't have that basis with which to do your research and to grow, to be nurtured, you're going to be stunted in that growth. I've seen so many students come forward and be very excited about this work, and then it just sort of, like we say, their dissertations go to the dissertation graveyard, right? It just goes nowhere after their studies, because there isn't that mentorship and ability to kind of carry forward. So that was the goal, to have a place of mentoring that next group. Because the reality is, if we're going to really revive Islamic psychology, it can't just be 1, 2, or 3 people. It has to be a whole pipeline of people going into this work.
And are there, I mean, if you had to send a message to some of the people that may be watching this that are looking at studying the mental health field and wanting to inject their faith or their values into it, are there particular advice that you might have for them, or areas that you think that you wish you had, that you want to, like a message that you wish was shared with you at that time that you'd like to share with them?
Yeah, I tell my mentees this all the time actually in the lab, and I say, I'm just so glad that they have these opportunities so much earlier than I did, right? Alhamdulillah. And a lot of it is perseverance. Perseverance, a lot of this is showing up. You continue to show up, and even when you fall down, you get back up and you show up and you continue to show up. And part of that means when people see that resilience, because that really is what it is, ultimately they respect that.
Yes.
There's a certain amount of respect for perseverance and for discipline, right? And then I always tell people, if you're in a field, whatever it may be, and my field is medicine, you have to be excellent at what you do. No shortcuts, no cutting corners. Because even just as a psychiatrist, you have to be excellent in your knowledge of psychiatry, your clinical practice of it, your work in it. So all your peers who may have been naysayers really can't say anything, because the quality of your work is excellent.
Stands on its own.
And then allows you to also say, well then, okay, she wants to branch into something a little different, fine. But she's actually excellent in comparison to the rest of us, right? And I think that's really important, the perseverance, the resilience, and the not letting anybody tell you that you cannot do your dreams. Find mentors, even if they're across the country or the world, to help you through.
I love that. One of the chapters of the Quran that we often share amongst ourselves and with other groups who we see are aspiring forerunners is Surah Al-Asr. And this idea that the final ayah of being إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا, so you talk about even the leap of faith of bringing these two worlds together, عَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَات, doing the work, and then the tawasi, the tawasi bil haqq, tawasi bil sabr. And I also feel that through the lab, creating the sense of community, and creating an opportunity even for, and the irony is in law, so even people who are studying mental health, that they also need a community to be able to support one another.
Oh, absolutely.
And to be able to, help raise each other up, in that regard. I feel like that's another benefit. I don't know if you're seeing that in the lab.
Absolutely. It's like a family feeling. They get their mentorship meetings, but also they present to one another in the lab. They give these wonderful, critical sometimes, but definitely helpful feedback on people's presentations, their grants, their papers.
Which is okay. I mean, I think having a safe space where I feel like, we can be critiquing, but I'm not critiquing the individual.
No.
It's just the idea and from a position of helping raise the bar for us collectively.
Yes, to polish before you kind of send that information or that paper or that work out into the world, right? You kind of, it's, I always say, this is the place you want to hear it here first, so that you polish before you kind of head out there.
Beautiful.
Mashallah. Yeah.
MashaAllah, Dr. Rania, there's so many, one of the things I love about your story is that there's, it's not just one of a personal journey and just within academia, but also helping to establish some institutions, that inshallah can carry that intellectual heritage forward. I know the booth that that we saw you in downstairs, Maristan, I'd love for you to talk a little bit about that organization, kind of what inspired it, and what are some of its objectives that you're trying to achieve to bring some of the thought leadership into action.
Yes, Barakallah Fiqh. Thank you for the opportunity to share about Madistan. It is a nonprofit organization. It was founded actually in the midst of the pandemic. The need for mental health services was just skyrocketed. I think it became so much more clear, even to people who found mental health to be pretty taboo. Actually started to really come to understand that this is actually a necessity. And then the bridging of our Islamic heritage is really one of the key goals of Madistan. There's two portions of it. One is a clinical portion, which we're based in California, but the dream or the prototype is actually to build out an actual holistic healing center at Madistan, inspired by the Islamic tradition that has in it not just your talk therapy and not just your medications, but actually sound therapy, color, the fountains, the water, the greenery, a concept of a really holistic care, that just as your body and your mind heal, so does your soul when you enter into this space. We hope, inshallah, that's our 10-year goal, inshallah ta'ala. On the other side, and in the meantime, we're doing a lot of work on psychoeducation, meaning workshops, seminars, classes, trainings for our imams, for our religious leaders, for those who are on the front lines, our Sunday school teachers, our youth directors, on very difficult topics like suicide, for example, and prevention of the Muslim community. And working on things such as, your Islamic psychology basics for those who need it. There are learning circles that we do every month that we hope people will attend to really start to decrease that stigma and taboo with mental health and from an Islamic tradition and perspective. And then we do these pop-up healing circles whenever the ummah is in crisis. So recently we had one just recently with the student advocates, right, with all the encampments that are happening across campus. And before that we had one, of course, for Palestine, Sudan, Turkey, when there was the earthquakes, the floods in Libya, all the different, unfortunately, the things that have been happening all throughout the Muslim Ummah. We've been kind of there to support and help. So this is our organization, and we hope, inshallah, continues to grow and benefit. Allahumma ameen.
May Allah continue to put barakah in it. And I'd love for you maybe to share, because I've heard you speak about it, what are maybe one or two components from our Islamic intellectual heritage when it comes to holistic healing that you're finding is something that's beneficial to the rest of society? I mean, one of the things we talk about with Forerunners is, we don't want to just bring excellence, in fields of business or mental health or sharing narratives just to the Muslim community, but also how do we bring that intellectual heritage to benefit the broader society? I'd love if you have maybe just even one example to kind of show how you're bringing something different. It's not just holistic healing for a Muslim audience, but is bringing that entire heritage to benefit everybody.
Yes. For this, I think about the concept of Islamic psychology. And even though it has the word Islamic before it, the reality is just like Islamic finance, for example, this concept of something that's riba-free, interest-free, is going to help anybody and everybody, whether you're a Muslim or not. It's the same concept of Islamic psychology because it's a fitrawi psychology. It speaks to the original primordial essence of us as human beings. So anybody and everybody can benefit from Islamic psychology framework, or even if you don't use the exact terminology we use in Arabic Islamic terminology, you're using a fitrawi concept that speaks to the soul of the very person you're healing. I personally use this with all of my patients, Muslim and non-Muslim alike, and they really kind of lean into it because they feel like this is helping me fully heal inside and out, kind of that holistic sense of healing. So I'm very excited about the field of Islamic psychology. I think it's going to offer immense help in the mental health field for everybody, Muslims and those who are not Muslim alike.
Alhamdulillah. Yeah. Alhamdulillah. I want to take it back maybe a little bit to just your own personal journey. We talked a little bit about some of the fath moments, but also we also ask about what are some of the ta'if moments. What are some of the moments where along that journey, like the Prophet ﷺ going through a difficult time and perhaps in the moment not seeing, how this particular puzzle piece fit into the broader, but still recognizing and going back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with a belief that ultimately ended up in something better. Is there something that in your journey, just even up until this point, that emerges as maybe a personal ta'if moment that you'd be willing to share with us?
Yes, and subhanAllah, there's been a few of those moments, such as the one about the writing all in red.
That's
subhanAllah.
It was
definitely a tough moment.
subhanAllah.
And it's interesting. I had a very similar thing happen once I did join the faculty, right out of training, and attempted to set up my lab, as all faculty members are permitted to set up their labs. It took me about 3 years to convince Stanford to put this on their website. There was something about the Muslim name before, because I didn't call it the Awaad lab, as a lot of my colleagues called it. I very consciously called it the Muslim Mental Health, and now it's called the Muslim Mental Health and Islamic Psychology Lab. And it took going to leadership and saying, is it because it says Muslim before the mental health? Needless to say, within a week the website was up.
Yeah, subhanAllah. Yeah.
And now it's actually, I would say, a very celebrated part of this department. Right, back from the person who scribbled on the paper, there has no place for this in our department, to having Stanford literally be the home of academic Muslim mental health research and work is an incredible journey, subhanAllah, and that's only Allah Azza wa Jal could have allowed for that.
Tawfiq, alhamdulillah. No, that persistence is a theme, that comes out, that having that resilience, along that path is something that's, I think, important for any trailblazing initiative.
It's lonely at first.
Yeah.
And part of my work with the lab is I have felt over the years like I'm a caravan leader of all these people. So that I would say, if you feel lonely, bring with you a caravan.
Yeah, subhanAllah.
And have the courage to become their caravan leader, so to say.
I love that. I think we're going to borrow that. MashaAllah.
Yeah.
So, I think some of the seeds, even with the work in Stanford now, I know you're also instrumental in kind of establishing the Muslim Mental Health Community Advisory Board in the United States.
MashaAllah, yes.
Would love to hear a little bit about the motivation for doing that. And what are some of the outcomes of that you'd like to speak about in terms of starting to take this work and using it to help make sure that the right initiatives and interventions exist for our community overall?
Yes, mashallah. That was definitely a beautiful and humbling experience of setting that up first in our community, the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area Muslim Mental Health Network, which is really advisory board of individuals who, some of whom were in mental health, but most of whom were really the individuals of your community who were the movers and shakers. Kind of we had people who were attorneys and dentists and teachers, and we had some youth members. We had the auntie and uncle figure who just had their ear to the ground, and everybody would go to them in the community if they had an issue. So they were all part of this board, and it's been great because they're advisory, as in to say, we need a clinic, so we brought in a clinic, right? We need a crisis response team, which is like a team that kind of activates whenever there's unfortunately a death by suicide, or in our case, in our community, one of our college students had a drowning, unfortunately accidental, or for example, when the Muslim ban happened here, or the next, we're in an election year now, but when the election year, some years ago happened, there's a lot of angst in the community. Just being able to bring any of the crisis issues and activate this team has been incredible. There was another, we don't know who all the Muslim mental health professionals in our area are, so we set up a website. So every time there's been a need, right, there's a response to the need. And that's been incredible to see and very humbling. And it's something the community leads, and myself as an academic partner really is from kind of leading from behind, but they're the ones who really essentially taking the lead on figuring out what they need and how to make it happen, inshallah.
Alhamdulillah. Yeah. Now we talk about one of the characteristics of Forerunners being multipliers, and I think part of that is recognizing not just when to lead from the front, but also when to mobilize other communities. And I love that it's not just mental health professionals, but people that are part of a broader network to mobilize towards these shared objectives. Alhamdulillah.
Yes, mashallah.
We'd be remiss, obviously, just given the time that we're in and everything that's happening in the world. This topic of mental health is also just on top of mind for the crisis, whether it's in Palestine, but also in other parts of the world. I know some of the work that you've done with the care program for refugees, and I'd be curious, based off of that experience, could you speak to, I know we obviously talk about some of the immediate impacts, obviously, that affect our brothers and sisters in Gaza and other places, but can you also talk about what are some of the things that you observe that we as a community should at least be aware of in terms of maybe some of the mental health needs that these types of situations cause in the immediate, situation, but also in the long-term aftermath? And
there will be a long-term aftermath. This is going to take, what's happening in Gaza and Palestine right now is going to take, unfortunately, generations to heal. I mean, this is, subhanAllah. Here in the United States and outside of, let's just say outside of Palestine, what is happening for so many Muslims across the Ummah and others is a sense of vicarious trauma. They're not there themselves, but because, subhanAllah, and humans were never really created to have it, but to have it like this, but to have the news, live coverage in the palm of your hand every day, almost like immediately, subhanAllah, bless our journalists that are able to kind of capture this and show the world what's actually happening. And it's right in the palm of your hand, but the human mind is not equipped to see that much death and destruction constant, especially young people who are seeing this as well. It's opening our eyes, it's educating us, but we're also experiencing trauma.
I remember hearing about that actually at a conference like this, and shortly afterwards deactivating Twitter and Facebook, just because of that reason, because
Right.
someone was saying that we're not even programmed to be able to handle
Right.
the scale of bad news that we hear,
Yes.
and be able to process it.
And some might say, I feel incredibly guilty to deactivate or to not be, in touching base or to seeing or every day kind of making sure what is happening on the ground. And that too is a real sense, right? The guilt is real and the trauma is real. Both are real. And to not deny it. I think that's important too, because so often we say, look, we have electricity and food and water and shelter, and who are we to, who cares about our trauma compared to the actual trauma on the ground? And what I want to say to that is, I hear you, and it's true what you're saying. And there are different forms of trauma. And vicarious trauma is in fact a real one. And so when we can just even name what this is and figure out what you do with it, then you start to channel your energy into something not just sort of this doom scrolling, but rather to actually go on and do something. So many people are writing and protesting and boycotting and putting their voice and their vote in places where it actually makes a difference, as opposed to kind of being really stuck on the social media. And it's important that we actually are able to take those next steps, because that's how you start to heal. SubhanAllah.
I feel like there's this theme of creating spaces for us to be able to, whether it is acknowledge what we've gone through, be able to support one another, be
Yes.
able to polish, but I think these literal and organizational spaces is so important
Yes.
to be able to make that happen. Dr. Rania, you've shared so much with us. I'd love to ask you in closing, for aspiring forerunners, for people who are looking at perhaps a path, whether it's in medicine or mental health or whatever it is that they may be doing. What advice would you have for them in terms of how to navigate that path in a way that doesn't compromise success, and at the same time doesn't make them feel like they have to compromise their sense of purpose and value system?
Yes, what a beautiful question. Thank you. I'm going to share something I learned from one of my spiritual teachers. It's been very helpful. The way this teacher would say, all of us need to have a family. And that means in whatever, so let's say your line of work, whatever it may be, make sure that you have, what does a family have? A family has, usually, there are parents or an elders, if you will. Those are the mentors. Always make sure as forerunners that you have your mentors. And as I mentioned earlier, even if it means that you have to look outside of your institution, outside of your home state, outside of your location, outside of your comfort zone to find those mentors. But never, this is also part of the Islamic tradition, we never break the chain right between the teacher and student. You always need teachers who are going to keep you in check, who are going to call you out and remind you when you need to, or when you've stepped out of line a bit, and inspire you and guide you. A family has the parents, if you will, here are the mentors in our case. There's also usually siblings, right? So you need peers. The peers are excellent for many reasons. One is support, that you lean on them, but also peers also help with competition, healthy competition, right? Because you kind of look at your peer, you're like, oh wow, look what they're doing, I should do it. So you get motivated, and it's a healthy competition back and forth.
As a sibling, that resonates. The
Right?
healthy part, sometimes my parents might question, but
Sure.
the competition, yeah.
But it's there, and so you need those peers for both the support, the comfort, and also for the ability to feel like I need to do more and not just get lazy and lackadaisical in what I'm doing. And thirdly, I would say what a family usually have, there's usually young people, offspring. Even if they're not biological, there's usually nieces, nephews, right? There's offspring, there's younger people. And this I would say to our forerunners, make sure you pay forward whatever Allah gave you. It is so important, because I worry about us and having all these means and mashallah having experiences, having titles, having, mashallah, all these successes, if you will, and not paying it forward is really problematic. And so part of my lab is actually part of that. It's a kind of zakat, if you will, of a charity, if you will, in not just, and we need to also learn that zakat isn't just wealth in money, but it's in our time, it's in our knowledge, it's in our efforts. So when you pay forward what you have, teaching, literally mentoring the next group, you're essentially, I love the concept of send the elevator back down.
Yeah, beautiful.
Right? If you made it up, press it back down and allow the next group to kind of come forward. And that is exactly why we have the lab and why I'm so big. People ask me, why do you take on all these students and isn't it a big headache? And it's like, no, it is allowing the next group, and it's me doing, paying forward what the ni'mah, the gift, right? This blessing that Allah has given me. And so I can't stand in front of him and him ask me, what did you do with all of this? Except to say, inshallah, we paid it forward. So make sure you have that all three elements. Hopefully that will...
The elders or the parents.
The elders, the mentors.
The siblings, and like the peers. And then the offspring where we're paying
which are
it
those
forward.
who are you're mentoring and helping, inshallah ta'ala.
So beautiful, subhanAllah. I love that.
Inshallah.
And I think that's a wonderful note to end on. Dr. Rania, may Allah reward you for all the work that you continue to do, with Stanford, Maristan, and the various different initiatives. There's so much I think that we can benefit from as far as those that are aspiring forerunners, the persistence, the willingness to take a leap of faith, and then making sure that you're part of this family as you're on this journey.
Definitely. And lastly, I would just say, and also you asked specifically about keeping true to your identity. This is so important, and for me it's been part of the journey, because there are times where it's like maybe I would be more successful, or I'd get somewhere quicker, or I'd be promoted faster, or I'd be selected for some sort of committee or something if I was just a little more less Muslim, if you will.
Right.
But it's not only is it clear on me, if you will, but my work is all Muslim, and so it's very obvious and very loud. And what I would say from that experience is that standing true to that actually inspires respect even in those who oppose or don't really like what you're doing, subhanAllah. And so please know that it is possible, even in these fancy level institutions and jobs and such, to still retain that, and that's tawfiq that comes from Allah Azza wa Jalla.
And I think it's also another way of paying it forward as well, because I think if the other people can see that, that's part of why we have this Forerunner50 series. If people can hear and see stories of people who even went through the struggle of trying to achieve whatever station Allah blessed them with through living their purpose and through being aligned with their values, then I hope we feel a sense of responsibility to carry it forward and to build on that work, inshallah.
Ya Rab. May Allah grant forerunners all the success, inshallah. Ameen.
Ameen.
And I hope, inshallah, all the cohorts that come through here are those who are going to then, as we said, pay it forward to the next group, inshallah.
Allahumma ameen. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day here in IGNA, and
my pleasure.
Inshallah, we look forward to continuing the conversation another time, inshallah.
Barakallahu feekum.